diverging views represented different ages, it's important to note that the revival and assertion of the need for sovereignty is very much the new age, the age of our immediate future. The age of globalism, anti-sovereignty, is in fact the age of our immediate past, whether we like it or not. And that's not to say that the age of globalism will not come again. It will. All patterns of human social behaviour are cyclical. But right now we're moving into an age in which many human societies demand a reinforcement of sovereignty for very good reasons. And this is because a reversion to social identity based around history and geography is the normal reaction to chaos, uncertainty and threat. We always circle the wagons when things get rough. We want to know who our friends are and where we can go to depend on our food, which makes the question of Australia becoming a net food importer one of the most shocking indicators that we can face today. Most Australians feel only the most vague stirrings of a perception of threat to our way of life. They, like Australians, like most urban people in wealthy societies, keep thinking that they only need to hold the line and insist on their entitlements, that they be sustained to weather what they believe to be a temporary storm. Well, it's not a temporary storm. The world is changing. The world is moving back to the new or old, whatever you want to call it, a set of identities. Australia's strategic context is changing as a result. The world itself is changing. And if the world is changing around us, then we have to change to address it. Our economy will change. It already has profoundly, just since the beginning of that last recession in the PRC. But the emerging global strategic context is by no means fixed in concrete, other than the reality of that jagged pattern of gradually declining population levels and continued mass population movements, which will in turn themselves profoundly transform economic patterns. Certainly if you see a lowered population level in various cities or societies, then there's going to be a decline in real estate value, real estate demand. That will in turn drive the investment pattern. Certainly there is and will be an increasing rush towards nationalism, toward identity-driven divisions and schisms in societies. This means greater bilateralism of trade and so on, rather than multilateralism of trade. Trump was quite right to insist that on abandoning the TPP and going for a series of bilateral trade agreements. There's no certainty as to the futures of the current great powers. The PRC has its problems, and so has the US. And by the way, in the PRC, their problems with water are profound. They are running out of water. They are running out of quality water as well. Their land is polluted, and as a result, the PRC is going to be a massive importer of food. That will be the next boom for Australian farmers if we can produce enough food.
They're buying our land.
They're buying our land, exactly. So, of course, does the European Union also suffer from these sorts of problems? But within this pattern, we can see how poorly Australia itself has fared in the recent decades compared with its immediate region. Australia's economic position seems set, in fact, unless it reverts to a cohesive national identity, to continue to erode in comparison to its neighbours. And this is particularly the case with comparison with India, Australia's main rival for influence in the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asian region, where we are witnessing a reversal of the trajectory of the past century. In 1978, Australia's GDP was 118 billion US dollars. India's was only 15% more than Australia's, despite so per capita we were very, very healthy. By 2016 though, Australia's GDP at $1.2 trillion was just over half of India's GDP. In other words, India had dramatically overtaken. In 1978, Indonesia's GDP was about 43% of Australia's. By 2016, it was more than 77% of Australia's, so it's catching up rapidly. The People's Republic of China's GDP in '78 was 218 billion, which was 176% of Australia's. But in 2016, it was 11.19 trillion, some 930% greater than Australia's. So what was Australia's national identity in the period when it was able to be so readily able to outperform the global average? Some of it, of course, reflected a less productive global context. But Australia's productivity was centred around its identity as a cohesive society based on assimilating peoples into a culture with which had common themes of communication, language, and including language, and a common respect for its hierarchy as a constitutional monarchy. It had, in short, a sense that it was a sovereign nation state, and it had a common identity, even if it found it difficult to articulate that identity. That's not to say we didn't have a lot of work to do to preserve, protect, and respect the place of Australia's constituent societies. We failed, for example, to understand the inherent sovereignty of Australia's original communities, in part because they themselves were unable to express their own sovereign identities in ways which permitted their preservation. Today, all Australian communities should be better able to articulate their roles in a greater or overarching continental polity, if we choose even to discuss sovereignty. But we have to begin with the premise that sovereignty and prestige are integrally related. As Stephen Pisoni said, the great strategic philosopher, prestige is the credit rating of nations, and that can be taken in an economic or in a political sense. And as we become a divided country, we lose prestige. Of course, there's a lot more to this discussion as to where Australia is going and where the world is going and why. However, what is clear is that if Australia is to survive as a sovereign nation state with its values, language, and overarching identity intact, then it has no better organisational model than that which centres around the Crown. About 10, 12 years ago, I did a study called Australia 2050, and we looked at, and I did a series of talks at the time, can Australia survive the next 50 years? Now I ask, can Australia survive the next 40 years? Well, do we have to continue to Australianise our crown? Almost certainly, I would say. I made several propositions as to how to achieve that in the Australia 2050 study. But at that time, we were all too content with our wealth and the unshakable belief that this time, for the first time in all human history, our economic boom would last forever. Well, nothing lasts forever except for the possibility of our identity. And it is that which we have neglected so badly. Thank you very much.